conferences out there. It's like family. We have a great panel today. We've got 45 minutes. We are all that's between you and lunch. So we want to make the most of it. I'm just briefly going to go through and introduce my panelists. I've got Michael Koshansky. He's SVP at Havas Digital. Greg Kerner. He's the CMO at MediaBank. Jarvis Mack, VP of Analytics at Rocket Fuel. Jen Vandermeer. She's a Managing Director at Dashes Group. And then, of course, Matt Wakeman, come up from North Carolina, and he's the Director of Analytics at the Archer Group. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.
So before we get to attribution, right, let's start with data. Right, because the data is the foundation that we're going to be talking about here. Right, just give us briefly, where is the data coming from? Who's storing it? Is it typically clean? And what is the overall quality of the data? And kick us off.
Absolutely. So the way we look at data, at least internally at Havas, is there are two ways that you can collect data. Right, there's the log files that you can get directly from the ad servers, and there's third-party pixels that collect data independent of the ad servers. We actually host the first type of data. We get direct access from DoubleClick, so whatever DoubleClick has and whatever MediaMind has is replicated in our database. In terms of cleanliness of that data, it's as clean as the ad servers provide it.
But that could be a little bit better, couldn't it?
It could be better. The system sits on a Greenplum platform that starts to process it with some provided algorithms and criteria. We do segment it in a way that allows us to analyze it in multiple fashions, multiple dimensions. Obviously, attribution modeling is going to be a big component of it. But the cleanliness of the data is specific to the ad server that provides it, and the accuracy of the data is specific to the ad server that provides it.
So you're really gearing up for real-time analysis here, right? I mean, that's the goal.
The data is fed into our system every 4 hours, where the Greenplum platform is optimized to process terabytes of data very quickly. So we can get at, let's say, an attribution model for a client within 50 minutes.
Greg, you know anything about data?
I personally know. So I don't know how I got up here. No. With MediaBank, we're the procurement software that sits at the major agencies to buy all media, all forms of media. And so when you pose that question, my first thought was the data sits everywhere, because the data is not just digital data. It's everything. It could be advertising data, it could be retail data, et cetera. So our clients, our direct clients, the major agencies are constantly teaming with us to figure out how to get at the data, which is this huge vague term. And it's a big smarmy mess, and the data does live in disparate places, and it's sometimes clean, sometimes not normalized, et cetera, and it's a big job to try to get at that.
But that's really the nut of the whole issue right here when we talk about the data, because you're right, the digital data is accessible, but that's just a drop in the bucket compared to all the other stores of in-house data. So how are we doing in terms of tapping in and digitizing that other data and combining it into a system that can be cross-referenced and accessed?
I would say that we're in the first inning of the first game of a doubleheader.
Yeah.
I think we're early stages. However, I really do feel good about the progress in the last 18 months or so, in that we are starting to normalize it. And I think the clients and the agencies are starting to realize that they have to clean up what they have so far and then sort of standardize what they're doing going forward so that they can look at it from a historical basis.
Jarvis?
Just so everyone is the background, Rocket Fuel is an ad network, so I come from the publisher standpoint, and our data is closer to Michael's in the sense that we have our own ad server, a pixel server. So the data that we use for analysis and looking at attribution, when we partner with an advertiser, it's about where they want to put pixels for us to be able to do analysis. So when we talk about doing analysis for an advertiser, maybe they're doing a major buy with us. So we say, well, if it depends on where you put it on. If you put it on in your email, search landing pages, wherever we have pixels as a tech platform, we can be that platform. And so the cleanliness just relies on where they end up putting that. So whether it's Rocket Fuel as a tech platform or you use DoubleClick, whatever tech platform you use, that's our lens in order to analyze the data.
I would think that your company in particular would make, or at least have the interest in leveraging outside third-party data to help drive your decision making and appropriately price and evaluate impressions. I mean, what do you think of the value of these third-party data services?
Well, third-party data services is for us, it's a separate component, but we looked at from a modeling standpoint. We looked at the predictive power when we have a pixel for an advertiser on the conversion page. We look at cross correlations of all the conversions that are happening, and look at all the correlations of all the different things that we know that are associated with a particular cookie. So from that, we can help buy the next best impression for them.
I mean, Jen, you bring a real social media angle to the panel. Just tell us how you view data and where you're getting your data from when you run your attribution and models.
I mean, I think it's been interesting to compare what I now call the traditional digital view of attribution to what we see in social, which is this interesting, not yet perfectly mirrored lens on our culture, but a distorted one, but still one that is rich in things that happen outside the ad tech universe, outside of media spend, outside of video uploads on YouTube, but like, the sum of human conversation that is currently digital. And you start to, at least from my perspective, I'm a data geek. I spend all my time looking at it, and it's rich, and it's wonderful to be diving deep into the social data. And I know that's where it's going to get most interesting.
I mean, and then Matt, you're on the agency side. I'm sure you get lots of reports, right? But how much useful data are you delivered, and are you drowned in data and frequently lacking insights?
Well, I think that we see a lot of different reports. We try to simplify things, right, from the agency side, especially when we're communicating with our clients. What's been really interesting from the data perspective is we've seen over the past few years the traditional data sources get cleaned up a lot, right? So when we talk about attribution across online and offline, the offline data is getting a lot cleaner, a lot easier to understand, a lot easier to manipulate and pull in pretty immediately. But as that's been happening, we've seen in the digital world this explosion in different sources of data and different types of data. So while we get cleaner data at the source level, now we've got a lot more variety of options in terms of sources.
Give us a couple of specific examples of some of those data options.
So in terms of the online stuff,
Sure.
we're talking about, we've got your traditional display advertising, impressions and clicks, and all the activity that happens within a traditional display campaign. We've got the social campaigns that we're running, whether those are advertising based or whether those are conversation and engagement based. We've got mobile. Mobile's a huge platform, and that's coming in a bunch of different angles. So all of these different things are coming in, and we've got to find ways to integrate that in a way that works.
What tools, you've got limited number of time, you've got massive amounts of data. What tools are you leaning on the most right now?
We keep things pretty simple. We have basically a 3-tier structure where we use the built-in reporting tools that come with whatever platform we're serving on, right? So we're going to sit with Facebook Insights or DoubleClick as our first level. We use spreadsheet tools like Excel and things like that for our secondary level. And then when we get into the sophisticated stuff, the real attribution modeling, we're using a statistical modeling tool. We rely on R because it's really flexible, it's open source. There are a lot of little plugins and things for it so that we can connect to lots of different things, like from the Word documents that we get some information in to the SQL databases that we're pulling stuff out of.
Do you ever have any vendors pitch you solutions? Does that ever happen to you?
Maybe, I don't know, what day is today?
right.
Twice this week?
Right. I mean, Jen, in your world, there's a whole range of tools that are starting to pop up. Just give us a sense as to what are the tools you use right now, and what are the tools you see out on the horizon that look useful.
Right now, we see better insights coming from social CRM tools, social publishing tools, trying to put some attribution link information into each post and follow that through in a closed-loop way. The tools being like Sprinkler or Spreadfast. The larger scale listening tools not so good for attribution. They tend to you can do keyword searches and try to find trends, but attribution it's kind of a wash. Tools on the horizon. I'm not allowed to pimp my own tool, but Dotchess Group is creating one. And that's where I get the most excited is in looking at social data as performance data for brands overall.
Okay, great. Jarvis, jump in here.
So, we do our own analysis. It's clearly there are attribution vendors out there, so we'd be remiss to not mention, guys like ClearSailing and Visual IQ and C3 Metrics, Adometry. For us, we want to talk to each of those guys and see whether or not they are good fits for us as Rocket Fuel, whether or not when an advertiser comes to us and says, help us figure out this attribution issue, whether or not we should be recommending any one of these guys or possibly white labeling them or what have you. To me, from a media buying and selling perspective, I think it's going to go down this path of that we saw with third-party research like Dynamic Logic, Insight Express studies, where agencies and advertisers really want to figure this out, but at the same time, some of these things are very expensive types of tools. So they want to lean on their partners for the help when they can get them. And for us, as a partner, we want to be able to help, but it's a significant undertaking, and it relies on things that, for us, sometimes is beyond our purview. And so that's why we want to work with some of those guys.
Okay.
Yeah, we're personally and from the company standpoint, we believe that neutrality is huge in this, and so on a daily basis we have some of the vendors calling us saying we want to integrate into MediaBank, and that way we'll be the chosen partner, and that's not for us to decide. Ultimately, it's for our clients to decide. So our perspective is open up our platform and allow through API our clients can use whomever they choose, or more importantly, a combination. Because I don't believe there's one particular vendor or entity out there that's going to nail it, at least not today. So we're opening the system up to allow them to build their own kind of mini stack, if you will. And neutrality has to be a part of that, because otherwise it's just by default, it's not, there's a bias there.
And of all the panelists here, you probably have, you're best positioned to have the most data across multiple channels, right? And we were talking a little bit about who owns the data before the panel began. And I understand that the platform is opening up. Is there any interest among any of your clients to opening up their data, at least on an anonymous basis, so that they could gain insights from a larger data pool?
Yes, we have had those discussions with our clients, and currently they want to keep them to themselves, which I think is understandable, but clearly our clients are gigantic, and so the scale that they have with their own data is statistically they can generate statistically from that. So it's not that much more beneficial for them to see the whole lot.
Right.
Although,
do we know that really?
That's what they believe.
Yeah. Right.
The one other thing, just before we pass the torch, is in talking to some of the CMOs that are the clients of our clients. Yeah. In many cases, they don't know the data sources that they want, and it's sort of like asking, it's so vast and so big. I'm not sure that they can pinpoint and say, yes, we want this and this and this to match with these things, and so that's part of the job of the individual point solutions to try to figure that out and then pull it together.
Yeah, I mean, somebody needs to be the filter out there, right? There's always room for that.
That's right.
What I was going to say is it actually, good point, it starts with data strategy, and a lot of our clients and a lot of the vendors do not have a solid data strategy, I feel. For example, data has 3 objectives, right? We talk about behavioral data, which is attribution, so what the consumer is doing, that's great, we understand that. We still don't know why, so that's you add the attitudinal component. So then you ask them through a survey, why did you engage in this particular platform, why did you click on this? But then you still don't know who, so then you add the third-party component. If you get all that data into a database, tools like Google Analytics, Facebook Insights become irrelevant because the data is harmonized and you can access it through tools like SAS or a BI tool like MicroStrategies, Cognos, et cetera. So, the point being is that I think the tools are important if you don't have your data centralized in one particular database.
All right, so Michael, how poor is the current state of attribution? Right? I mean, are we consistently overpaying for some media and underpaying for some media? And what are the real problems in attribution?
The most egregious that we've seen is in the area of retargeting, where a lot of the networks and a lot of the partners are putting delayed pixels on the site and are getting the last click attribution. And we've seen this across the board. And so when we would run a standard report on last click, we would see partners that we would never think would perform as well. And when you dig underneath, you realize that it is specifically as a retargeting tactic, which is the most effective, that allows them to get that credit. So what we typically recommend for our media buyers is pick only one retargeting network. And leverage that network because you can control your frequency, you can control your reach, and at that point you know exactly how the others stack up.
Sure.
So that's a huge learning, number one. So that's
pretty. I guess it's a great point you made, but it's it's pretty clear because they're retargeting. Right?
Exactly.
It's the very nature of the beast, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then, but how much do you think media is spending? How accurate do you think the price is of the media that we are buying? Do you think anything is egregiously overpriced or underpriced?
I do think so. When you look at the networks, there's we see a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
And the overlap is the best performing inventory. Anything that is unique or incremental to that particular network is actually maybe 5% or so percent of the performance. So I think if we are paying the same price for the overlap as we are for the unique placements, then we are overpaying.
So the free market theory again, right? I mean, the more overlap there is, the more efficiently the media is priced.
Exactly.
Colin,
yeah,
can I jump in for a moment?
Yeah.
So coming in from the ad network publisher side, kind of to add on to what Michael was saying, we definitely see this kind of what we call internally a knife fight between, say, like a dozen partners that are all fighting for that last impression or last click. And obviously, having a single retargeting partner or a single one that is really going to focus on just that last impression makes sense. But what happens is, and we see this because we have that pixel on the conversion page, and so we'll know there might be 100 conversions, all of which we've been involved in the path that we've shown an ad to that particular those 100 conversions, but we only get credit for maybe 4% or 3% out of 100. And so when things like that happen, we know that there is, quote unquote, a knife fight, as we term it, going on. And so in order to, kind of get the right amount of credit, you need a better attribution system. But in the meantime, you've got a bunch of partners that are going after the same impression, and yes, that does elevate the overall CPM, and it does a disservice to the end advertiser. So what it's a very much vested interest for us to have a better attribution system to value bringing people early on in the funnel as opposed to just being the last impression.
So you think we have some serious attribution issues, and not only do we have serious attribution issues, but there are people out there trying to game it for their own benefit.
Oh,
which
most
of course
definitely,
makes sense,
most
right?
definitely.
And they're effectively doing so, right? And driving up pricing in that regard.
Absolutely.
We had a client who hired a firm that had the sort of the black box,
Yeah.
and our client ended up saying we demand to see behind the curtain, and they opened up the curtain and there were like 15 college kids in a room crunching numbers,
right?
And it was horrifying to the client and so you got that stuff. It's Wild West out there right now because you got
but
that
that's
stuff
like,
going.
isn't that the majority of it? I mean, when you dig into these, like what exactly is Interclick's model?
Yeah.
When you dig into these proprietary black boxes.
It's a bit of a catch-22 because the black box for the legitimate companies, the black box is their special sauce, so to speak.
Sure.
When they open that up,
right?
That can
It's a
expose
spreadsheet.
them.
Right.
Not necessarily all the time, but sometimes.
The one thing that I would add is to validate the methodology of an attribution model. The first thing you do is you have to ignore any of the weights or any of the parameters that are assigned through their black box, and just look at the actual continuum journey and make sure that is at least representative of what you're seeing online. From that, then you allow them to add the weights, because if they just come to you with their attribution model that's already fully baked, you have no clue if they're tracking the entire journey, and you cannot validate that.
So, I mean, listen, we were talking about how we know there's inefficiencies in attribution. We know that makes for inefficiencies in media pricing. But how is online attribution compared to TV? Radio. I mean, are we...
So the one difference between, let's say, offline attribution or econometric modeling, as it's known in the industry, and attribution online is that the attribution online is centered around the user, which is the objective, which is actually a cookie, which is actually a browser. Where you have offline data, it's a time series. Everything is on either week or time or month. And so it's not at the individual level, right? And so when you're building an econometric model or a media mix model to figure out how you should allocate your budget for the 360, you're doing it over time. You're not, and you're regressing against sales or some other objective. When you're building an attribution model online, you're regressing against the person's activity or conversion individually.
And then, Jen, I mean, is this where, sort of some of the social media comes in, Facebook comes in, because they are trying to, shift the metrics back towards what traditional media buyers are doing?
Yeah, I mean, the theory is that all of digital has been focused on last click and shopping cart.
Right.
Results or some kind of click to some kind of experience. And with social, you can actually measure brand performance through engagement at the fuzzy front end of the funnel, whether you call that awareness or discovery, whatever is happening when someone becomes aware and creates emotional attachment, you can see the results in a way that you can't with offline. And so that's where digital could potentially move from being kind of stuck at 12-15% of all spend to starting to access the larger marketing
Do you think
budgets.
social could become? Do you think social has less of an attribution problem then? I mean, is that a potential?
Well,
is that a
it's
possibility?
attributing what to what. If you're trying to attribute, your actions as a marketer to some kind of performance outcomes, it's not the best place to do, shopping cart optimization. But it's a really interesting place to do brand marketer optimization.
I mean, Matt, how often do your clients come back to you and say, why am I paying this, or questioning?
That's the whole question right now. That's it. That's what. It's everything. I've either not started and I need to know what it's going to do for me, or I'm in deep and I have no idea what's going on.
And and it's not. You can't really say we'll find out.
Well, it's not just about how much money I'm spending in Facebook ad blocks or promoted tweets or anything like that. It's a combination of that plus experiences that are investments, plus the FT full-time equivalent staff members that man the Twitter and the Facebook are sometimes a huge portion of those costs. So you have to create real ROI analysis, money in minus money out over money in. And what's interesting when you see it from that perspective is that ad spend is a portion of delivery of those outcomes.
The only problem with the ROI analysis is that there's so many variables that are assumed or that can be adjusted, right? That you can really achieve any result that you want. And Matt, do people question the do people question your results or spreadsheets or final tallies?
It's of course, and it's so early days in social that every time we do it, it's so illuminating, and the insights are so great that it's worth redoing it and comparing and stack ranking and competitively in the industry. And yes, and we should be doing it constantly.
Well, and we've definitely had lots of conversations with various clients about different kinds of attribution models and different ways the results play out. We had one client who was totally surprised by the positive results in a social advertising campaign that we ran, and we were honestly kind of surprised by it as well. I think that one of the things that we're seeing is we came from this world where we had a lot of television and offline advertising research that was done over a period of 20, 30 years, and there was some really solid work done in that area to really understand how things interacted, right? And the econometric models that Michael was talking about totally work in that kind of environment, in an environment where you have 3 TV stations, 2 newspapers, and a couple of radio stations, and that's how you're advertising. We've got this explosion of channels now, and so as we've seen consumers move their activity online, we've seen the efficacy of those offline channels reduce, but we've also seen these online attribution models come up. And I think we're talking about at least 2 or 3 different stages of evolution for online attribution. We've got this current one that we're in right now where we're moving beyond the last click to something where we're much more into line of sight, right? So that's everything that happens within somebody's browser. Well, it turns out that I've got a browser on my iPhone in Safari, but I've also got a browser on my iPhone in every app that has a web view. And those 2 browsers are completely different. The cookie systems are different, everything else is different, and there's really no way to tie those 2 together. So when we look at all this, we've got a lot of different options in terms of activity, in terms of data sources and everything else. And I think what we're seeing is the opportunity for a mixed model of attribution where we combine the traditional time series analysis of the offline with the online multi-channel with some attitudinal measures as well and some psychographics, because you need to really understand how this stuff is impacting your audience, and there's a certain amount that we can get from behavioral data, which is great, but there are some things that we just need to understand from an attitudinal or a psychographic perspective.
How bad is this problem, though? I mean, Michael, have you seen people make poor decisions because of bad data?
We've seen that quite a bit. We've seen overinvestment. We've seen partners drop. We've seen overinvestment in 2 DSPs. It's prevalent. It's prevalent. And the core issue is not even the lack of attribution modeling. It's actually poor understanding of how the technology collects data online from the media planners. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to actually complement that point by saying I think the other aspect of it is also like a siloed focus by each of the planners of the agency for a given campaign that say the way they're going to measure this campaign is this particular CPA. And so my CPA or my KPI needs to be this level, and they're only focusing on just the bottom of the funnel. And the reason I believe it also leads to bad decisions is because if you're siloed in that approach, right, then you're not thinking about how many additional people you're making aware, how many additional people you're driving in terms of consideration, and you're not thinking about your campaign across a number of different efforts.
But, you know, those things have some small value, right? And I know there's some models out there to value these intangible components, right? But at the end of the day, most people can't, you know, run a campaign and live on the intangible benefits, right? They need to drive revenue. And so what's wrong with that focus on those metrics?
Well, it's the idea, again, of the last touch. So if you're not making people aware, if you carry out what you said to this logical conclusion, right, we would never be running any awareness campaigns. Right.
Well, you know, is there a reduced emphasis on awareness campaigns?
So just to go off that point, I think today what we've seen with our clients is attribution modeling is not used for budget allocation. Most clients, if they're sophisticated, will still revert to using media mix modeling for budget allocation, right. And they will give you $6 million or $12 million for online. What you do with that $6 or $12 million online is up to you. If you're a good agency, you'll use an attribution model and you'll optimize that such that next year's exercise, that $6 million or $12 million will look much better towards your revenue goal. If you don't optimize, then it will look the same. So I think if the individual planners are using CPA, CPC, or CPM for their optimizations, the ultimate goal is how do you get your budget to increase on the digital side next year against TV, print, or other type of channels. That's the current environment that we're playing in.
Right. And why do we want their budgets to increase onto digital? You know,
digital agency.
Right. You know, right. I mean, is it that much cheaper or effective, or you know?
That's called a
bonus time. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. I just real quick. I just have an inherent problem with the term bad data. Because I don't think it's the data that's bad. It's the fact that...
No, I said bad decisions.
Well, you said bad data, too.
Okay.
So we look at the tape.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're right. It's in my notes here. It's in my notes, right.
But, you know, it's just that the problem really is the lack of standardization around it, how it's created to begin with. It's in 9 million different formats. So that goes through any good system. It's going to come out.
Data's just neutral, right?
You're getting it now.
I'm getting it now. Well, right? But I mean, do you see that, you know, data that's mishandled is making poor decisions?
Yeah, I suppose we really don't pay attention to our clients don't make poor decisions, clearly, but you know, we don't really pay attention to that aspect of it. What we're working with our clients on a daily basis is really on the front end, is that aspect I'm talking about. Is trying to normalize before it even goes into the system, normalize it and cleanse it and make sure it's accurate and together.
And good data.
Good data. Yes.
All right.
Well, just to really quick piggyback on that, with respect to like bad data, good data, I think there's a lot of data that's more useful than other data. And when you come at campaigns from the perspective of okay, what are the metrics that I have available to me in order to evaluate this campaign? It's a very different perspective than what's the purpose of this campaign? What should I be evaluating it on? And then you can start to push towards the right kinds of the metrics that are going to be more useful and more optimizing.
What does mobile factor into this? Is mobile any different, or is it just, you know, yet another data stream?
I think it's different in that it's much more contextual. It tends to be a lot more real time. So people are going to be acting on it in different ways because they carry their phones with them everywhere. But at the same time, from an attribution perspective, it's one more source of data that we have to find a way to approach and normalize with everything else.
And what about the fact that, you know, a mobile device can be, you know, more specifically identified? Does that help?
To a certain extent, it can. At the same time, with Facebook on your browser, you're going to be identified pretty clearly no matter what. Right.
It's a pretty interesting place to see the translation from intangible and mushy into direct action, and you know, in a retail environment. Particularly, again, if you're not just looking at ad spend on mobile, but you're looking at the brand's custom app that's being used in the store, or you know, a CPG app that's being used in a retail store, or doing an effort with a location-based service and seeing that closed-loop response, kind of taking a look at all of those different types of marketing tactics and being able to compare performance impacts, whether they're high-level brand intangibles or direct cash register correlations, is really interesting. And so we're so early stages. We should just be getting our fingers dirty and rolling up our sleeves to see everything that we can get our hands on.
So some of you research, dare I say it, historians may remember there was a company out there called OMMA that if you want to look at digital touch points, or not even just digital, basically all touch points, they use the underlying technology behind Shazam to do recognition of ambient signals. And so the idea is that they had panels. They had 6 panels, and ultimately they shut down the service. It was expensive for them to run, obviously, but they partnered with Nielsen. What they were trying to do is capture ambient audio, whether it was TV, out of home, radio, sure. Cinema, as well as digital. So they were going to be a single source, basically, for looking at all the touch points that people were exposed to. So, I think as an industry, for us to look at that type of thing, push for those types of efforts, those are the types of things that will help us look at all the touch points across all media. The more we have research tools like that, ultimately, it's a very expensive type of program to run. It's very expensive for them. And what they did was actually arm their panels with mobile phones, paid for their data plan, so there's inherent skews obviously in doing that approach. And to execute that kind of program is kind of a one-time program, as opposed to what we'd all like, which is kind of an ongoing basis for each and every campaign.
When you first asked the question, the thing that came to my mind was the volume coming through mobile is going to be a volcano anytime soon. You've got the S1 from Facebook, and the number, these are rough, but there are 810 million monthly users. I think 46% used it through a mobile device where they don't serve ads yet. And so you think about once they open up that door, it's going to be a flood of information.
You think they'd have figured that out before they filed their S1, right?
I
guess room to grow.
And I think the social aspect of mobile alone, to your point, is that the data is going to explode in there. You look at Pinterest. I mean, 6 months ago it was nothing, and now all of a sudden it's red hot. And there's going to be another one behind that in another 6 months. So.
Just putting theory aside, in terms of mobile, what we've seen in the way it's performed for clients is it's definitely a lower funnel channel. And if you compare it to an ROI, it's something that you actually engage in right before the transaction, right before the conversion. And so we've seen clients spend a lot on mobile branding, and that's misfired. And so just from a practical standpoint, what we're seeing today, using attribution, using our analysis, very lower funnel, very close to conversion, and that's where it performs the best.
So what we want to do is we want to just take some questions. If any of you have questions, real quick, for any of our panelists, just raise that hand. Steve's got a microphone.
Hey guys, thanks. Lawrence DeCapua from GE. So as a company that's considering, using attribution modeling a bit more, would wonder if you could share some sort of missteps that you've seen in sort of launching or commissioning attribution studies.
I can. Well, first of all, and we're actually working with one client on this today, is the first piece is to actually identify the right attribution partner, and that's to go through a proper attribution RFP. And so there's a host of, Forrester's got a list of questions or reviews. There's a host of criteria that you might want to develop, one that's universally accepted and one that's accepted specific to GE that you'll want to evaluate these vendors on. And I think that's step one, is identifying the vendor. And then also identifying the actual technology that they use for your attribution to make sure that you're comfortable with making decisions based on their recommendations. The other thing that I will point out is that attribution should not and will not replace cross-channel reporting. So with that, you still want to have a 360 database of some sort that you can leverage for reporting. And then you can use attribution for deep dives and analysis of the consumer journey.
So I would say that I'd emphasize the point I had made earlier, which is being focused and siloed on individual campaigns and individual metrics. So the broader you can think about a program and factor in both upper and mid funnel metrics into that, as well as a lower funnel metric, and how that plays into people creating some kind of conversion then that's what you want to factor in. And so there's different ways to think about that. At Rocket Fuel, we actually put together a POV on, kind of ways to get to a more sophisticated attribution approach. I have a couple copies with me, but we can exchange business cards.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, you as GE have very clear business goals. Have that define the RFP process. Have that push the vendors to meet your demands. Don't have the attribution model defining the tool itself.
Okay, great. Well, listen, what we're going to do is just do the speed round, right? Ultimately, we're going to figure out this attribution. It's probably going to take some more time. We're nowhere close in solutions, but when we do, just give me that, a winner or a loser, right? Kick us off, Michael.
Networks are going to lose.
Okay, Greg.
Clients are going to win.
All right, Jarvis.
Retargeters are going to lose.
All right, Jen.
Social's going to win.
All right, Matt, take us home.
Retargeting's going to lose.
All right. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Michael, Greg, Jarvis, Jen, Matt, I'm Colin Gillis, and have a great lunch.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin.